Greetings, one and all, once again, back to Exploring Arda, a Tolkien-centered podcast where I'm your host Jackson, and I go through a bunch of Tolkien's works other than Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. So, as is obviously seen, continuing the story of Children of Húrin. So, I think that the last half of Children of Húrin is more exciting. I wouldn't really say like more exciting, but it's like more things just happen each chapter, and each chapter has something drastic that happens. But if you'd like to know all about it, then be sure to check out the playlist that I've made. Children of Húrin should be updated, should be, but also check out my other playlist of Silmarillion and Fall of Numenor and other short stories that I've read for Tolkien stories. So, but from the last time of Children of Húrin was when Morwen and Niënor were pretty much out in the wild, kind of, because they were in search of any tracks or clues of where Túrin is, because Morwen was worried, and Niënor kind of just came with. And at the end of the chapter, Mablung, who was sent by Thingol for kind of like for their protection, they ended up being attacked by orcs, and both Morwen and Niënor kind of fled from the scene, and Niënor is pretty much lost, and Morwen is nowhere to be seen. So it's a very chaotic moment, and that's kind of like where we're at here. I think I'll be reading 2 chapters, so I'll be reading 15 and 16, and then that means it leads like the last 2 chapters to be read for the next episode, so it kind of just works out that way, which is nice. So, I think without further ado, we'll just go right into chapter 15 here, Niënor in Brethil. So, here we go. But as for Niënor, she ran out into the wood, hearing the shouts of pursuit come behind, and her clothing she tore off, casting away her garments, one by one as she fled until she went naked. And all that day as she ran, as a beast that is hunted to heart bursting, and dare not stay or draw breath. But at evening suddenly, her madness passed. She stood still a moment as in wonder, and then, in a swoon of utter weariness, she fell as one stricken down into a deep brake of fern. And there amid the old bracken and the swift fronds of spring, she lay and slept, heedless of all. In the morning she woke, and rejoiced in the light as one first called to life. And all things that she saw seemed to her new and strange. She had no names for them, for behind her lay only an empty darkness, through which came no memory of anything she had ever known, nor any echo of any word. A shadow of fear only she remembered, and she was wary, and sought ever to hidings. She would climb into trees or slip into thickets, swift as a squirrel or fox, if any sound or shadow frightened her. And thence she would peer along through the leaves with shy eyes, before she went on again. Thus going forward in the way she first ran, and she came to the river Teaglin, and stayed her thirst. But no food she found, nor knew how to seek it. She was famished and cold. And since the trees across the water seemed closer and darker, as indeed they were, being the eaves of Brethil forest, she crossed over at last and came to a green mound, and there cast herself down, for she was spent, and it seemed to her that the darkness lay behind her, was overtaking her again, and the sun going dark. But indeed it was a black storm that came out from the south, laden with lightning and great rain, and she lay there cowering in terror of the thunder, and the dark rain smote her nakedness, and she watched without words as a wild thing that is trapped. Now it chanced that some of the woodmen of Brethil came by in that hour from a foray against orcs, hastening over the crossings of Teaglin to a shelter that was near. And there came a great flash of lightning, so that when the Hod and Eleth was lit as with a white flame. Then Túrin, who led the men, started back and covered his eyes and trembled, for it seemed that he saw the wraith of a slain maiden that lay on the grave of Findulas. But one of the men ran to the mound and called to him, Hither, Lord, here is a young woman lying, and she lives. And Túrin coming lifted her, and the water dripped from her drenched hair. But she closed her eyes and quivered and strove no more. Then marveling that she lay thus naked, Túrin cast his cloak about her, and bore her away to the hunter's lodge in the woods. There they lit a fire and wrapped coverlets around her. She opened her eyes and looked upon them, and when her glance fell on Túrin, a light came in her face, and she put a hand towards him. For it seemed to her that she had found at last something that she had sought in the darkness, and she was comforted. But Túrin took her hand and smiled, and said, Now, lady, will you not tell us your name and your kin, and what evil has befallen you? Then she shook her head and said nothing, but began to weep, and they troubled her no more until she had eaten hungrily of what food they could give her. And when she had eaten, she had sighed, and laid her hand again in Túrin's, and said, "With us you are safe. Here you may rest this night, and in the morning we will lead you to our homes up in the high forest. But we would know your name and your kin, so that we may find them, maybe, and bring them news of you. Will you not tell us?" But again she made no answer, and wept. "Do not be troubled," said Túrin. "Maybe the tale is too sad yet to tell. But I will give you a name, and call you Niënor, Maid of Tears." And at that name she looked up, and she shook her head, but said, "Niënor." And that was the first word that she spoke after her darkness, and it was her name among the woodmen ever after. I'll do like a little bit of a break here. So this comes to the point of the story where it's kind of weird, where Niënor escapes the clutches, I guess you could say, of Glaurung, but the spell is still very, very heavily on her. She escapes, and then she ends up meeting, pretty much the men of Brethil, which is under Túrin's guide and whatnot. They find her upon the hill where Findulas was slain, so of course they have to go and check it out, because that's like, wow, that's like the exact spot where Findulas was killed. They find out that it's actually Niënor, but of course with Glaurung's curse on her, she doesn't remember anything. So as long as that curse is on her, she wouldn't remember anything about herself, or just how to speak or do anything, so, which is kind of crazy. But then of course Túrin kind of like accepts her, and there's like the weird connection that they have, which is kind of like the weird part of the story, which I guess we'll cover probably this chapter or the next, and I guess you guys will see, because it goes for a wild turn. But they pretty much accept her as, part of their group for her protection. So on to the story we go. In the morning they bore Niënor towards Brandir, and the road went steeply up until it came to a place where it must cross the tumbling stream of Gelibros. There a bridge of wood had been built, and below it the stream went over a lip of worn stone and fell down by many foaming steps into a rocky bowl far below, and all the air was filled with spray like rain. There was a wide green sward at the head of the falls, and the birches grew about it, but the bridge there was a wide view toward the ravines of Teaglin, some 2 miles to the west. There the air was ever cool, and there wayfarers in summer would rest and drink of the cold water. Dimrost, the rainy stair whose falls were called, but after that day Nen-Girith, the shuddering water. For Túrin and his men halted there, but as soon as Niënor came to that place, she grew cold and shivered, and they could not warm her or comfort her. Therefore they hastened on their way, and before they came to Brandir, Niënor was wandering in a fever. Long she lay in her sickness, and Brandir used all his skill in her healing, and the wives of the woodmen watched over her by night and by day. But only when Túrin stayed near her would she lie at peace, or sleep without moaning, and this thing all marked that watched her. Throughout all her fever, though often she was much troubled, she murmured never a word in any tongue of elves or of men. And when health slowly returned to her, and she waked, and began to eat again, then as with a child, the women of Brethil must teach her to speak, word by word. But in this learning she was quick, and took great delight, as one that finds again treasure, great and small, that were mislaid. And when at length she had learned enough to speak with her friends, she would say, "What is the name of this thing? For in my darkness I lost it." And when she was able to go out again, she would seek the house of Brandir, for she was most eager to learn the names of all living things, and he knew much of such matters, and they would walk together in the gardens of the glades. Then Brandir grew to love her, and when she grew strong, she would lend him her arm for his lameness, and she called him her brother. But to Túrin her heart was griven, and only at his coming would she smile, and only when he spoke gaily she would laugh. One evening of the golden autumn they sat together, and the sun set the hillside and the houses of Brandir aglow, and there was a deep quiet. Then Niënor said to him, "Of all things I have now asked the name, save you. What are you called?" "Túrin," he answered. Then she paused, as if listening to some echo, but she said, And what does that say, or is it just the name for you alone?" "It means," said he, "Master of the Dark Shadow. For I also, Niënor, had my darkness, in which dear things were lost, but now I have overcome it, I deem." And did you also flee from it, running, until you came to these fair woods? She said. And when did you escape, Túrin? Yes, he answered. I fled for many years, and I escaped when you did so. For it was dark when you came, Niënor, but ever since it has been light. And it seems to me that what I long sought in vain has come to me. And as he went back to his house in the twilight, he said to himself, Húrin Elith, from the green mound she came. Is that a sign, and how shall I read it? Now that golden year waned and passed to a gentle winter, and there came another bright year. There was peace in Brethil, and the woodmen held themselves quiet and went not abroad, and they heard no tidings of the lands that lay about them. For the orcs that at that time came southward to the dark reign of Glaurung, or were sent to the spy on the borders of Doriath, shunned the crossings of Teglin, and passed westward far beyond the river. And now Niënor was fully healed and was grown fair and strong, and Túrin restrained himself no longer, but asked her in marriage. Then Niënor was glad, but when Brandr heard of it, his heart was sick within him, and he said to her, Be not in haste. Think me not unkindly if I counsel you to wait. Nothing that you do is done unkindly, she said. But why then do you give me such counsel, wise brother? Wise brother, he answered. Lame brother, rather, unloved and unlovely, and I scarce know why. Yet there lies a shadow on this man, and I am afraid. There was a shadow, said Niënor, for so he told me, but he has escaped from it, even as I. And is he not worthy of love? Though he now holds himself at peace, was he not once the greatest captain, from whom all our enemies would flee if they saw him? Who told you this? Said Brandr. It was Dorlas, she said. Does he not speak truth? Truth indeed, said Brandr. But he was ill pleased, for Dorlas was chief of that party that wished for war on the orcs. And yet he sought still for reasons to delay Niënor, and he said, therefore, the truth, but not the whole truth. For he was the captain of Nargothrond, and came before out of the north, and was, it is said, son of Húrin of Dorlamine of the warlike house of Hador. And Brandr, seeing the shadow that passed over her face at that name, misread her, and said more. Indeed, Niënor, well may you think that such a one is likely ere long to go back to war, far from this land maybe, and if so, how long will you endure it? Have a care, for I forebode that if Túrin goes again to battle, then not he, but the shadow, shall have the mastery. Ill would I endure it, she answered, but unwedded no better than wedded, and a wife maybe would be better restrain him and hold off the shadow. Nonetheless, she was troubled by the words of Brandr, and she bade Túrin wait yet a while. And he wondered and was downcast, but when he learned from Niënor that Brandr had counselled her to wait, he was ill pleased. But when the next spring came, he said to Niënor, Time passes. We have waited, and now I will wait no longer. Do as your heart bids you, Niënor most dear, but see, this is the choice before me. I will go back now to war in the wild, or I will wed you, and go never to war again, save only to defend you, if some evil assails our home. Then she was glad indeed, and she plighted her troth, and at the midsummer they were wedded, and the woodmen made a great feast, and they gave them a fair house, which they built for them upon Amon Obel. There they dwelt in happiness, but Brandr was troubled, and the shadow of his heart grew deeper. So that's the end of the chapter, and yeah, it's a little crazy. I wouldn't say it's like reading about it is an uncomfortable chapter, I suppose. Just because, Túrin literally ends up marrying his sister, so it's so that's kind of crazy. I remember when I read this the first time, I think it was in Silmarillion, that I was reading through this, and I was kind of confused, where I'm like, wait, hold on a minute, so, wait, did Túrin actually marry his sister? And I had to go back, and I'm like, no, Niënor's new name is Niënor, so, I guess, and I get the whole concept of but she wasn't clear of mind and all that stuff. She didn't know who she was, and then at the same time, Túrin doesn't know what his sister really looks like, because it's been 20 years, over 20 years since he last saw her. So sure, but at the same time, as a reader, the connection, and it's wow, it's crazy how that actually just happened. And Brandr, even though he doesn't really see the connection, see the pictures, he knows that something is up with Túrin. He's like, something about this just is not right, even though he doesn't specifically know that they're, blood. So, yeah, that's why it's kind of crazy that they actually they end up getting married together. So it's, I don't know. That's all I can say is that it's crazy to really like think about it. So, but yeah, that's kind of how chapter 15 ends, is them being married. So, yeah. Túrin and Niënor, I should say, are married. Crazy, but that's just how it goes. So I think we're just going to go right into chapter 16, the next one, the coming of Glaurung. So here we go again. That's what I'm saying. It's like from what the last time that I said was like the chief villain of this story is Glaurung. He causes all this personal mischief and whatnot. So yeah, so chapter 16, coming of Glaurung. Now the power and malice of Glaurung grew apace, and he waxed fat, and he gathered orcs to him, and ruled as a dragon king, and all the realm of Nargothrond that had been was laid under him. And before this year ended, the third of Turambar's dwelling among the woodmen, he began to assail their land, which for a while had peace. For indeed it was well known to Glaurung and to his master that in Brethil there abode a remnant of free men, the last of the three houses to defy the power of the north. And this they would not brook. For it was the purpose of Morgoth to subdue all Beleriand, and to search out its every corner, so that none in any hole or hiding might live that were not thrall to him. Thus, whether Glaurung guessed where Túrin was hidden, or whether, as some told, he had indeed for that time escaped from the eye of evil that pursued him, my apologies, is of little matter. For in the end, the counsels of Brandir must prove vain. And at the last two choices only could there be for Turambar: to sit deedless until he was found, driven forth like a rat, or to go forth soon to battle, and be revealed. But when tidings of the coming of the orcs were first brought to Brandir, he did not go forth, and yielded to the prayers of Niënor. For she said, "Our homes are not yet assailed, as your word was. It is said that the orcs are not many, and Dorlas told me that before you came such affrays were not seldom, and the woodmen held them off. But the woodmen were worsted, for these orcs were of a fell breed, fierce and cunning, and indeed they came with a purpose to invade the forest of Brethil, not as before passing through its eaves on other errands, or hunting in small bands. Therefore Dorlas and his men were driven back with loss, and the orcs came over Teaglin and roamed far into the woods. And Dorlas came to Turambar and showed his wounds, and said, See, Lord, now is the time of our need come upon us, after a false peace, even as I foreboded. Did you not ask to be counted one of our people, and no stranger? Is this peril not also yours? For our homes will not remain hidden, if the orcs come further into our land. Therefore Turambar arose and took up against his sword Gurthang, and he went to battle, and when the woodmen learned this, they were greatly heartened, and they gathered to him, till he had a force of many hundreds. Then they hunted through the forest and slew all the orcs that crept there, and hung them on the trees near the crossings of Teaglin. And when a new host came against them, they trapped it, and being surprised both by the numbers of the woodmen and the terror of the black sword that had returned, the orcs were routed and slain in great number. Then the woodmen made great pyres, and burned the bodies of the soldiers of Morgoth in heaps, and the smoke of their vengeance rose black into heaven, and the wind bore it away westward. But few living went back to Nargothrond with these tidings. Then Glaurung was wrathful indeed, but for a while he lay still and pondered what he had heard. Thus the winter passed into peace, and men said, Great is the black sword of Brethil, for all of our enemies are overcome. And Niënor was comforted, and she rejoiced in the renown of Turambar. But she sat and thought, and he said in his heart, The die is cast. Now comes the test in which my boast shall be made good or fail utterly. I will flee no more. Turambar indeed I will be, and by my own will and prowess I will surmount my doom or fall. But falling or riding, Glaurung at least I will slay. Nonetheless he was unquiet, and he set out men of daring as scouts far afield. For indeed, though no word was said, he now ordered things as he would, as if he were Lord of Brethil, and no man heeded Brandir. Spring came hopefully, and men sang at their work. But in that spring Niënor conceived, and she became pale and wan, and all her happiness was dimmed. And soon after there came strange tidings from the men that had gone abroad beyond Teaglin, that there was a great burning far out in the woods of the plain towards Nargothrond, and men wondered what it might be. But before long there came more reports, that the fires drew ever northward, and that indeed Glaurung himself made them. For he had left Nargothrond and was abroad again in some errand. Then the more foolish or more hopeful said, His army is destroyed, and now at last he sees wisdom, and is going back whence he came. And others said, Let us hope that he will pass us by. But Turambar had no such hope, and knew that Glaurung was coming to seek him. Therefore, though he masked his mind because of Niënor, he pondered ever day by day, and by night, what counsel he should take, and spring turned towards summer. A day came when two men returned to Ethelbrandir in terror, for they had seen the great worm himself. In truth, Lord, they said, he draws now near to Teaglin, and turns not aside. He lay in the midst of a great burning, and the trees smoked about him. The stench of him is scarce to be endured, and all the long leagues back to Nargothrond his foul swath lies, we deem, in a line that swerves not, but points straight to us. What is to be done? And before I kind of continue this, we got another illustration here. Good old Alan Lee. This is kind of like, let me see here. It's kind of like the burning that Glaurung is. You can't really see it very well, especially like with this, with this camera. But it's basically just, showcasing Glaurung, kind of just like blowing out all the fire from his mouth and like making all the skies all cloudy and gray and smoky. It's very, very cool. So, back to it here. Little, said Turambar, but to that little I have already given thought. The tidings you bring give me hope, and rather than dread. For if indeed he goes straight, as you say, and does not swerve, then I have come counsel for hardy hearts. The men wondered, for he said no more at that time, but they took heart from his steadfast bearing. And actually, I'll just do like a little bit of a break here too. So, yes, despite Túrin being this basically like this hero of Brethil, especially, basically guarding the whole lands that he's like kind of in control of. He's not really like the lordship of the land, but like everybody sees him as their protector because he has the Mormegel, the Black Sword, and all the orcs are terrified of him, obviously. And especially when you're like hanging orcs up on trees, it's like, it's kind of scary actually, yeah. I could definitely see that. The intimidation is very, very real against the orcs there, so. But even more terrifying than the orcs, and probably even more terrifying than Túrin, is Glaurung. And obviously now he's on the move, and he's close to Teaglin, which is where a lot of people are very nervous and kind of scared that he's coming ever so closer to them. So, so back to it once again. Now the river Teaglin ran in this manner. It flowed down from Erdwethrin swift as Narog, but at first between low shores until after the crossings, gathering power over other streams, it clove away through the feet of the highlands upon which stood the forest of Brethil. Thereafter it ran in deep ravines, whose great sides were like walls of rock, but pent at the bottom of the water flowed with great force and noise. And right in the path of Glaurung there lay now one of these gorges, by no means the deepest, but the narrowest, just north of the inflow of Calibros. Therefore Turambar sent out 3 hardy men to keep watch from the brink on the movements of the dragon, but he himself would ride to the high fall of Nengirith, where news could find him swiftly, and whence he himself could look far across the lands. But first he gathered the woodmen together in Ethelbrandir, and spoke to them, saying, Men of Brethil, a deadly peril has come upon us, which only great hardihood shall turn aside. But in this matter numbers will avail little. We must use cunning, and hope for good fortune. If we went up against the dragon with all our strength, against an army of orcs, we should but offer ourselves all to death, and so leave our wives and kin defenseless. Therefore I say you should stay here, and prepare for flight. For if Glaurung comes, then you must abandon this place, and scatter far and wide, and so some escape and live. For certainly if he can, he will destroy it and all that he espies. But afterwards he will not abide here. In Nargothrond lies all his treasure, and there are the deep halls in which he can lie safe and grow. Then the men were dismayed, and were utterly downcast, for they trusted in Turambar and had looked for more hopeful words. But he said, Nay, that is the worst, and it shall not come to pass, if my counsel and fortune are good. For I do not believe that this dragon is unconquerable, though he grows greater in strength and malice with the years. I know somewhat of him. His power is rather in the evil spirit that dwells within him than in the might of his body, though great though that may be. For hear now this tale that I was told by some that fought in the year of the Nirniath, when I and most that hear me were children. In that field the dwarves withstood him, and Azagal of Belagost pricked him so deep that he fled back into Angband. But here is a thorn sharper and longer than the knife of Azagal. And Turambar swept Gurthang from his sheath, and stabbed with it above his head, and it seemed to those that looked on that a flame leapt from Turambar's hand many feet into the air. Then they gave a great cry, "The black thorn of Brethil!" "The black thorn of Brethil," said Turambar. Well may he fear it. For know this, it is the doom of this dragon, and all his brood, it is said, that how great soever be his armor of horn, harder than iron, below he must go with the belly of a snake. Therefore, men of Brethil, I go now to seek the belly of Glaurung, by what means I may. Who will come with me? I need but a few with strong arms and stronger hearts. But Dorlas stood forth and said, I will go with you, Lord, for I would ever go forward rather than wait for a foe. But no others were so swift to the call, for the dread of Glaurung lay on them, and the tale of the scouts that had seen him had gone about and grown in the telling. Then Dorlas cried out, Hearken, men of Brethil, it is now well seen that the evil of our times, the counsels of Brandir, were vain. There is no escape by hiding. Will none of you take the place of the son of Handir, that the house of Haleth be not put to shame? Thus Brandir, who sat indeed in the high seat of the lord of the assembly, but unheeded, was scorned, and he was bitter in his heart. For Turambar did not rebuke Dorlas, but one Hunthor, Brandir's kinsman, arose and said, You do evilly, Dorlas, to speak thus to the shame of your lord, whose limbs by ill hazard cannot do as his heart would. Beware lest the contrary be seen in you at some turn. And how can it be said that his counsels were vain, when they were never taken? You, his liege, have never set them at naught. I say to you that Glaurung comes now to us, as to Nargothrond before, because our deeds have betrayed us, as he feared. But since his woe is now come, with you leave, son of Handir, I will go on behalf of Haleth's house. Then Turambar said, 3 is enough. You twain will I take, but Lord, I do not scorn you. See, we must go in great haste, and our task will need strong limbs. I deem that your place is with your people, for you are wise and you are a healer, and it may be that there will be great need of wisdom and healing ere long. But these words, though fair spoken, did not embitter Brandir the more, and he said to Hunthor, Go then, but not with my leave, for a shadow lies on this man, and it will leave you to evil. Now Turambar was in haste to go, but when he came to Niënor to bid her farewell, she clung to him, weeping grievously. Go not forth, Turambar, I beg, she said. Challenge not the shadow that you have fled from. Nay, flee still, and take me with you, far away. Niënor most dear, he answered, we cannot flee further, you and I. We are hemmed in this land, and even should I go, deserting the people that befriended us, I could but take you forth into the houseless wild, to your death and the death of our child. 100 leagues lie between us and any land that is yet beyond the reach of the shadow. But take heart, Niënor, for I say to you, neither you nor I shall be slain by this dragon, nor by any foes of the north. Then Niënor ceased to weep and fell silent, but her kiss was cold as they parted. And I'll do like a quick little break here. A lot of back and forth between Túrin and, I guess, like his people, so to speak, his people. Part of them are just like, okay, yeah, Glaurung is coming close. This is really, really bad. So what should we do? Should we like hold back and stay on like the defensive side? But Túrin's just like, you know what? This is kind of like this is my destiny. You know, I gotta kill this dragon because so much has happened against him that he's just full of, I guess, in a sense, vengeance and rage and all that stuff. And so there's a lot of back and forth. He takes a couple guys with him, and he's like, well, that's, pretty much, it's good enough, even though he thinks that's, for him to slay the dragon, as Glaurung is kind of going throughout the realms of Tieglin and burning up everything, so someone's got to stop him, I guess. Who better than Túrin, I guess. So that's kind of like where we're at in the story, and I think we'll just go right back into it again. There it is. Then Turambar with Dorlas and Hunthor went away hot-foot to Nen Girith, and when they came there the sun was westering, and shadows were long, and the last 2 of the scouts were there awaiting them. You come not too soon, Lord, they said, for The dragon has come on, and already when we left he had reached the brink of the Teaglin, and glared across the water. He moves ever by night, and we may look then for some stroke before tomorrow's dawn. Turambar looked over the falls of Calabros, and saw the sun going down to its setting, and black spires of smoke rising by the borders of the river. "There is no time to lose," he said, "yet these tidings are good. For my fear was that he would seek about, and if he passed northward and came to the crossings, and so to the old road in the lowland, then hope would be dead. But now some fury of pride and malice drives him headlong." But even as he spoke, he wondered, and mused in his mind. Or can it be that one so evil and fell shuns the crossings, even as the orcs? Húrin Elith, does Findulas lie still between me and my doom? Then he turned to his companions and said, "This task now lies before us. We must wait yet a little, for too soon in this case we're as ill as too late. Then when dusk falls, we must creep down with all stealth to Teaglin. But beware, for the ears of Glaurung are as keen as his eyes, and they are deadly. And if we reach the river unmarked, we must then climb down into the ravine and cross the water, and so come to the path that he will take when he stirs." "But how can he come forward so?" said Dorlus. "Lithe he may be, but he is a great dragon. And how shall he climb down the one cliff and up the other, when part must again be climbing before the hinder part is yet descended? And if he can so, what will it avail us to be in the wild water below?" "Maybe he can so," answered Turambar, "and indeed if he does, it will go ill with us. But it is my hope from what we learn from him, and from the place where he now lies, that his purpose is otherwise. He has come to the brink of Cabed en Aras, over which, as you tell, a deer once leaped from the huntsman of Haleth. So great is he now that I think he will seek to cast himself across there. That is all our hope, and we may trust to do it." Dorlas's heart sank at these words, but he knew better than any all the land of Brethil, and Cabed en Aras was a grim place indeed. On the east side was a sheer cliff of some 40 feet, bare but tree-grown at the crown. On the other side was a bank, somewhat less sheer and less high, shrouded with hanging trees and bushes, but between them the water ran fiercely between rocks, and though a man bold and sure-footed might ford it by day, it was perilous to dare it at night. But this was the counsel of Turambar, and it was useless to gainsay him. They set out therefore at dusk, and they did not go straight towards the dragon, but took first the path towards the crossings. Then before they came so far, they turned southward by a narrow track and passed it into the twilight of the woods above Teaglin. And as they drew near to Cabed Aras, step by step, halting often to listen, the reek of burning came to them, and a stench that sickened them. But all was deadly still, and there was no stir of air. The first stars glimmered in the east before them, and faint spires of smoke rose straight and unwavering against the last light in the east. In the west! Ah! I'm going to do a little bit of a break, because apparently I can't read. A little bit of a break, just to, kind of slow it down a little bit. So yeah, they're trying to sneak around and try to pretty much catch Glaurung at unawares. That's kind of like their whole, I guess, thought process of, well, especially for Túrin, he's more of the ambitious guy, I guess. And yeah, he wants to catch Glaurung. Surprise from the underside, obviously, because even though his scales are thickened on the outside for Glaurung, the underside of a dragon is obviously, the softer part, and that's kind of like his thinking, which makes sense. I get it. So, it's pretty well solid thinking, so it's just, kind of hard, especially when it comes to Glaurung, to sneak up to Glaurung. But, yeah, that's kind of like where we're at here, and I'm going to probably read until the end of the chapter here. So, here we go. Now when Turambar was gone, Niënor stood silent as a stone, but Brandir came to her and said, "Niënor, fear not the worst until you must. But did I not counsel you to wait?" "You did so," she answered, "yet how would that profit me now? For love may abide and suffer unwedded." "That I know," said Brandir, "yet wedding is not for nothing." "No," said Niënor, "for now I am 2 months gone with this child. But it does not seem to me that my fear of loss is more heavy to bear. I understand you not." "Nor I myself," said he, "and yet I am afraid." "What a comforter you are," she cried. "But Brandir, friend, wedded or unwedded, mother or maid, my dread is beyond enduring. The Master of Doom was gone to challenge his doom, far hence, and how shall I stay here and wait for the slow coming of tidings, good or ill? This night it may be he will meet with the dragon, and now shall I stand or sit, and pass the dreadful hours?" "I know not," said he, "but somehow the hours must pass, for you and the wives of those who went with him." "Let them do as their heart bid," she cried, "but for me I shall go. The miles shall not lie between me and my lord's peril. I will go to meet the tidings." Then Brandir's dread grew black at her words, and he cried, "That you shall not do, if I may hinder it, for thus will you endanger all counsel. The miles that lie between may give time for escape, if ill befall." "If ill befall, I shall not wish to escape," she said. "And now your wisdom is vain, and you shall not hinder me." And she stood forth before the people that were still gathered in the open place of the Ethel, and she cried, "Men of Brethil, I will not wait here. If my lord fails, then all hope is false. Your land and woods shall be burned utterly, and all your houses laid in ashes, and none shall escape. Therefore why tarry here? Now I go to meet the tidings, and whatever doom may send. Let all those of like mind come with me." Then many who were willing to go with her, the wives of Dorlas and Hunthor, because those whom they loved were gone with Turambar, others for pity of Niënor and desire to befriend her, and many more that were lured by the very rumor of the dragon, in their hardihood or their folly, knowing little of evil, thinking to see strange and glorious deeds. For indeed so great in their minds had the black sword become that few could believe that even Glaurung could conquer him. Therefore they set forth soon in haste, a great company, towards a peril that they did not understand. And going with little rest, they came warily at last, just at nightfall, to Niënor, but a little while after Turambar had departed. But night is a cold counselor, and many were now amazed at their own rashness. And when they heard from the scouts that remained there how near Glaurung had come, and the desperate purpose of Turambar, their hearts were chilled, and they dared go no further. Some looked out towards Cabin and Arras with anxious eyes, but nothing could they see, and nothing hear save the cold voice of the falls. And Niënor sat apart, and a great shuddering seized her. When Niënor and her company had gone, Brandir had said to those that remained, "Behold now I am scorned, and all my counsel disdained. Choose you another to lead you, for here I renounce both lordship and people. Let Turambar be your lord in name, since already he has taken all my authority. Let none seek of me ever again either counsel or healing." And he broke his staff. To himself he thought, "Now nothing is left to me, save only my love of Niënor. Therefore, where she goes, in wisdom or folly, I must go. In this dark hour nothing can be foreseen, but it may well chance that even I could ward off some evil from her, if I were nigh." He girded himself therefore with a short sword as seldom before, and took his crutch, and went with what speed he might out of the gate of the Ethel, limping after the others down the long path to the west march of Brethil. So that's the end of the chapter there. Very anxious and, I guess, tense moments throughout the story. Yeah, so everybody's pretty much marching out just to see the big showdown. At least that's the way that it seems. Everybody's really excited to see. Well, maybe not excited, more of just there's rumors of, the Black Sword of Mormegal against the terror of Glaurung, so of course people are very intrigued with what will happen, obviously. The last two chapters is very obvious of what happens, but the showdown of Glaurung versus Túrin is very well nigh, I guess you could say. It's very close at hand. And I forgot that Niënor and Túrin have a kid together, so that's... So yeah, this episode's the very awkward episode with Túrin and Niënor, because, you just, obviously, some reason, whatnot, I try to brush over it because it's kind of awkward for me, so, to read through it, and especially to read out and publish it as an episode, so. But, yes, Glaurung is main villain. Túrin is still very hot-headed and is very, very bent on destroying Glaurung and stopping him from pretty much burning up all of Brethil and all of the forest and people and whatnot. So, makes sense. Cool. But yeah, he's very focused on the task ahead. So, and then the whole thing with Niënor trying to persuade the people to be like, okay, well, even if Túrin fails at slaying Glaurung, then we should be there and try to fight back. Because either way, Glaurung is still very, very close, and he's still gonna pretty much just burn up everything and destroy everything in his path, because that's just kind of like the will of Morgoth. Is like, okay, well, if they're against Morgoth, then, well, too bad. And then they just kind of just take over the whole place. So, but yeah, and that's kind of like the end of the chapter there. So, hopefully you guys enjoyed it. I've been enjoying the story, as usual. I always do. Yeah, and like I said before, check out the rest of the story through the playlist that I've created. And I think that's kind of all that I have for this episode. And the next episode will be the last one. I'm still trying to decide on whether I want to do a review of Children of Húrin or not. Just kind of like the whole thing, just like pinpointing all these different points, obviously, throughout the chapters of the book. But if I should, let me know down below in the comments, either in this episode or the next one. Most likely the next one. If you guys want me to do a review of the whole story, like I did with the Silmarillion, let me know. Because, yeah, I enjoy it. I enjoy the story. So, with all that being said, just stay tuned for another episode. And may the light of Elbereth be with you all. Farewell.